There is a podcast that lies between the imagination of two simple-minded earthlings. Travel with these two longtime friends, Jimbo and 80s E, as they attempt to explore the fifth dimension. Follow along with them as they take the key and unlock the door to the vast space between shadow and substance. This podcast is one of trivia, of insight, and of sounds and ideas from one of the greatest television shows ever produced. You are embarking on a timeless journey. There is your signpost up ahead. You are entering the tragedy of cinema's Twilight Zone.
This is Africa, 1943. War spits out its violence overhead, and the sandy graveyard swallows it up. Her name is King 9, B-25 medium bomber, 12th Air Force. On a hot, still morning, she took off from Tunisia to bomb the southern tip of Italy. An errant piece of flak tore a hole in a wing tank, and like a wounded bird, this is where she landed. Not to return on this day or any other day.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Tragedy of Cinema, the Twilight Zone series. Yes, we're here back for the fresh start of Season 2 of the Twilight Zone. I'm your host, Jimbo, and once again, joined by the interdimensional being known as...
80Z, here from the fifth dimension,
80s.
And two booths, one podcast today. Yeah, we're on remote. We're on remote. We're out in the desert here, so we're...
Right.
Yeah.
We're a two-man band today, but it's just in two separate facilities. So,
yeah.
Eric's good to have you back, ready to get going on Season 2 again. Really enjoyed Season 1. We learn from our mistakes as we go along, and hopefully people still stick by us till the end. So,
yeah.
Here we go. Season 2, Episode 1, King 9 Will Not Return.
All right. You want me to take it away? King 9 will not return. Okay. King 9 will not return. This is the Twilight Zone Season 2, Episode number 1. It was directed by Buzz Kulick, and it, of course, was written by Rod Serling. And featured music is original score by Fred Steiner. And our original air date for this particular episode was September the 30th, 1960. And the total production costs come in at a steep, whopping $61,812.53, which I think up until this point might be the most expensive episode that went into production so far. And just for a little fun fact, when we adjust that for inflation, we're looking at $571,279.34 in today's dollars. And by the way, inflation is growing by the minute. So it might even go even a little bit higher by the end of this year. So that is an 824% gain when you adjust it for inflation, 824% increase. So, Jimbo, the cast is pretty short in this particular episode. Why don't you go ahead and take that?
Sure, we have Eric's grandpa, great-grandpa, Bob Cummings.
No relation,
No relation. Not that he does know of. I told him to bust out Ancestry.com and see if he could find out, but plays Captain James Embry. He was famous for the movie Dial M for Murder, where he played Mark Holliday back in 1954. Gene Lyons as the psychiatrist. He's been seen in Star Trek, the original series in 1966, where he played Ambassador Fox. You had Paul Lambert as the doctor. A really cool fact about him is he was actually an Army Air Corps lieutenant in World War II.
Okay.
But he's also best known for Planet of the Apes, where he was the Ministrog in 1968, and he was also in Spartacus in 1960, where he played Gannicus. Richard Lupino played Blake, and Jenna McMahon as the nurse. Now, the interesting fact about Jenna McMahon is she did a lot of writing for a lot of TV shows, and some of these are Mama's Family, Soap, Carol Burnett Show, The Facts of Life. She was the creator of Facts of Life.
Wow.
And she was also on an episode, or directed episode, of Different Strokes. So very popular writer for her time. I mean, that is some really great shows that she came up with, especially Mama's Family and even The Facts of Life. You know what I mean? I thought it was great.
Yeah,
so there you have it. That is your cast.
Yeah, that's a pretty big collection of 70s and 80s sitcoms. Are pretty notable, at least for her only having basically like 2 lines in this episode. That's pretty neat. Let's move on to just this tech specs here, I guess. You know what? I'm not even really going to go over there because they're pretty much the same. 25-minute runtime, mono, all the things that we've normally touched on. The aspect ratio is 1.33 to 1, which is interesting. This may be a rabbit trail, but for the new Seinfeld, I guess, a lot of people are complaining because it just went to Netflix that they changed the aspect ratio. And I was going to ask you this earlier, Jimbo, because we watched it on Vudu, the Twilight Zone. I wonder what aspect we should do a investigation on that and see what aspect ratio Vudu uses for these episodes. Because going back to the Seinfeld thing, apparently when they changed the aspect ratio from late 80s and early 90s television, whatever the aspect ratio was then, I don't remember what it is. Some of the scenes and some of the comedy, people were complaining the object comedy was getting cut off when they transferred it over. I thought that was interesting.
Well, don't also forget that you can change the aspect ratio on your TV screen by itself anyway.
Right.
So you can go from a 16:9 to a whatever, you know what I mean, on your TV zone. But also, I think we need to point out, with Twilight Zone in Season 2, especially not in this episode but in future episodes, this is where they tried to cut some of their budget by using handheld video camera footage. And the sad thing about that is some of those that were shot were fantastic stories, and it just didn't deliver the same way, I don't think. Yeah. And we'll talk about that as we get to them, but I thought we should go ahead and point that out. That may be why some of these budgets were high, is because they're trying to cut money because CBS or whatever was like, can't do it.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the costs later in my notes. I have some in the trivia notes. I have some of the costs of the actual aircraft used here for this episode. Is pretty expensive. But anyway, let's move on with the plot. The plot reads as such. The plot of the downed B-25, the pilot of the down B-25, Captain James Embry, awakens in the desert with no memory of how he got there. More worrisome, his crew is nowhere to be found. He begins to wonder if he's hallucinating, especially after he sees one of his men sitting in the cockpit. When he awakens in the hospital, he thinks it might have all been a dream, but wonders, did any of this really happen? So there's a nice little plot twist there at the end, and we come to find out some of the answers. Well, we don't really get that question really answered completely. But Jimbo, did you want to go ahead and we start out the episode, of course, as tradition. We start out with Rod's narration. We thought we would read it this time. So do you want to go ahead and drop that in right now?
I will, but not only that, but this is also the first feature on-camera narration at the beginning of an episode for Rod Sterling, too. So,
right.
Season 2 already starting off with some new stuff. So here we go, the intro. This is Africa, 1943. War spits out its violence overhead, and the sandy graveyard swallows it up. Her name is King 9, B-25 medium bomber, 12th Air Force. On a hot, still Monday, she took off from Tunisia to bomb the southern tip of Italy. An Arab piece of flak tore a hole in a wing tank, and like a wounded bird, this is where she landed. Not to return on this day, or any other day.
Right. And as we drop in the episode, after Rod's commentary there, which all this was provided to us, by the way, both of us have a book called Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. It's entitled The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. So that's where we get all of our information as far as notes are specific to that particular resource that we both use. But as we drop in on the episode, we see parts of an airplane just strewn all about on, we're in the desert, which I guess it's important. Let me just drop this in right here because it fits so well. This particular episode, Serling was inspired to write the teleplay because of recent news events reporting the discovery of a B-24 Liberator bomber known as Lady Be Good. Following a bombing raid in April of 1943, the Lady Be Good of the 514th Bomb Squadron failed to return to base. After attempts to locate the plane, the 9 crew members were classified as missing in action and they were presumed dead. And they were believed to have perished after the crashing into the Mediterranean Sea. Flash forward to February 27, 1959, when a British oil surveyor named Paul Johnson located the wreckage of the Lady Be Good in the Sahara Desert, following a first sighting from the air on May 16th and June 15th, 1958. The plane was broken into 2 pieces. It was immaculately preserved, with functioning guns, working radio, and supplies of food and water. No human remains were found near the aircraft, nor parachutes found. This episode of The Twilight Zone was not only a film inspired by the Lady Be Good incident, a 1970 made-for-TV movie entitled Soul Survivor concerned the ghost of the B-25 bomber crew that crashed in the Libyan desert, and a 1964 novel, Flight of the Phoenix, featured a similar premise, but the plot does not involve ghosts, strange visions, or a lone survivor. Instead, the story concerns a group of survivors who would crash land into the desert and must resort to an arrogant aeronautical engineer to help repair the craft and seek escape route. So I thought that was interesting that Rod's whole premise was based on a real-life event of this crash B-2. Wouldn't that be cool, like, to come back from World War II, and it's like, 1958, 1957, and find that thing completely preserved with all of its working guns and
yeah, I'd be calling Antique Roadshow. Let's see how much we can get for this bad boy,
yeah.
Right?
It kind of reminded me of Lost. Like, I know you're a big fan of Lost, and like kind of the premise of how the plane crashes on, but I guess that was like on a desert island though. But that would be really cool to see something like that completely preserved and fully intact. I thought that was an interesting inspiration for Rod. So we come back to the episode, and we are in the opening of the episode. This particular Captain James Embry, he's lying on the desert floor, if you will, in the sand, and all of the airplane parts are strewn all around. And he's really wrestling with him. There's kind of this vacillating back and forth between an inner monologue and shouting things out loud, right? So he really starts with the inner monologue early in the episode. And he says, "Oh yeah, I remember." He's trying to remember all of the events of how he got to where he's at, and he's like in the middle of this plane crash, and he's trying to remember how he got there, and he's going in his mind. He's trying to come up with some kind of idea of how he got to where he's at. He doesn't know if anyone's alive, and there are like a lot of questions that surround what's going on right now. And that's really, I guess, would be the meat of the whole entire episode. The main thrust of the episode is him, sort of going in and out of his inner monologue versus saying things out loud, and he's hallucinating, and it's really hot, and there's no water. Jimbo, do you want to jump in? Anything interesting or something that jumps out to you early?
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but when you're a solo actor like this, it's really hard to get into the episode. I'm not saying that Bob Cummings didn't do a good job here, man, but for me, it's really hard for when they have these solo actors on here. You really have to, and then not only that, but they start talking to themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I was in that situation, I don't know if I'd necessarily be talking to myself. I'd still be trying to figure out what's going on. But it is for the viewers, I guess, courtesy, being able to put words, have him talk, to walk you through what's going on through his mind and everything as he's trapped there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I definitely prefer the episodes where there are dialogue between people and the cast is a little bit larger, because it helps you stay focused and, kind of helps pull you in on the episode. On these solo acted episodes, it is kind of difficult to hang with 20 minutes. But yeah, for sure, Bob Cummings did a really good job. And, Rod had a lot of high praise for him in all of the resource material that I've looked at. He really regarded Bob Cummings very highly and his acting ability, and he has nothing but praise for him, and he does do a great job. You know what I was thinking? I was going to ask you this the other day. What if they remade this episode? When we talked about this earlier before we started the podcast, Bob Cummings is believable, but like, what if you remade this episode and you put Joaquin Phoenix in? Just with like the association with, like, say, the Joker, and having somebody going back and forth and hallucinating and basically borderline schizophrenic, and he's all of the elements are beating down on him and stuff. And
I definitely could see him pulling it off.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool, because Bob Cummings did a great job, but it is hard to follow.
Well, I mean, if they remade it and they wanted to even bring it more modern day, you could say the Desert Storm War, and have somebody find a plane from Desert Storm or something. So
right. So we're in the King 9's fuselage as we move along, and there's static on some headphones here, and he calls for help, and he's calling Mayday, Mayday. He's calling out. The radio has a little bit of static on it. And he really just kind of stumbles around the airplane, calling out for, his, what would you be at, like the people that are under his command. He's calling out for all of his men, and he's calling them out by name. And Blake, he calls, probably 100 times. He just yells his name out loud, and it's he's kind of just trying to come to grips with what's going on, and trying to get, some stability, and trying to formulate a plan. And so after he kind of calls for help on the radio and doesn't get any response back, he's really starting to become downtrodden at this point. He's really confused, as we said before. And he checks his pocket, and he finds an empty pack of cigarettes. And then this inner monologue begins again, and he feels utterly responsible for what's happened to his crew. And he tries to calm himself down and say, easy now, I'm in charge. There's got to be a solution to this problem. There's got to be a logical explanation. And, he kind of does that throughout the episode. Then he goes from Sorry, Jimbo, go ahead.
They spend a lot of time with him just wandering around looking for his crewmates.
That eats up a lot of time.
And it was starting to take me out of the episode, because you're like, come on, we understand he's stranded here and he's looking for his crewmates.
Right.
And then I think we're coming upon the part where he goes outside of the thing and he finds a water canteen of one of his crewmates.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Klein, if I remember right.
Right. So he finds it on the ground, and it has Klein's name on it, right? And then it turns really like
just
ominous.
a lot of wandering around for me. You know what I mean?
Yep. And then, but he does. There is a point where he looks back to the cockpit of the King 9, and he sees Blake sitting in the cockpit, or Blake's ghost, if you will, and he yells out, his name, yells out to Blake, and then Blake vanishes. But then again, it's just a lot of volleying back and forth between his inner monologue and speaking out loud. And then he comes to a point here in the episode where he stumbles on to a grave of Klein, right? He starts speaking out loud, and he stumbles onto this grave of Klein's. And then he says something like, rest in peace, rest in peace. And then we get this is actually an interesting piece in the episode, because we start hearing jets flying overhead. All right. And we get a little bit of insight into the twist. Jimbo, go ahead.
Right. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but when he was running up to the window for Klein, you can see Captain James Embry like spray painted on the side right under the window.
Okay.
I thought that was a really cool little thing. And also I have a question. Sure. He is the captain, but he's also the pilot, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think he is.
I'm not sure, but why is Blake sitting in the pilot seat then?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about those, type of aircraft, and all of the, who did what, like who was assigned to what positions. I mean, obviously, yeah, he's the captain, but I don't know if he would actually fly the plane or not. That's a good question. But he hears those jets flying. Going back to the jets, he struggles to understand why he knows that they are in fact jets. And he knows all about them, and he starts naming them off, right? B-52, he starts naming off this litany of jets, and he doesn't understand because, obviously, in the setting in which he is at present, their jet aircraft weren't invented at that particular time in World War II. So once he stumbles onto I already talked about that, he stumbles onto the grave site of Klein, and then isn't there doesn't the whole crew make like a ghostly appearance at the grave?
Yeah, that's after he sees the airplanes in the sky, which was actually driven by or flown by the Blue Angels. They were actually flying the U.S. Navy F-9, F-8 Cougar fighter jets, and they were built by Grumman. But yeah, this is where he's like, come on, guys, it's not funny. He's starting to crack under pressure. Yeah, and I think he walks a little bit away from the airplane, and this is where he sees all, I think, 6 or 7 of them lined up there.
Mm-hmm. And then, like you said, he really starts to crack up here, and then he goes back to the airplane again, and he's sort of standing, and he's like, we're going to get out of here, guys. He's standing like in front of the propeller, and he's like, we're going to get out of here. We got to get out. It's not going to be easy, but we got to, he's trying to scramble. And I mean, his state of lucidity is completely gone. He really starts to crack up, and he starts to have a complete nervous breakdown, and the scene changes. This is where we get right to the end. We're nearing the end, and we have the camera pan down in the scene of, I thought this was pretty cool. Klein is like clutching the sand, and then it switches to him clutching the sheets in his bed, and then a lot of the twist begins to be explained here because he's in the hospital now. Jimbo?
But I do think we missed an important part is he was looking for the crew still, and he hears that clinking, and he walks over that top of that sand dune, and there's that cross in the sand that has the helmet of one of the persons on it.
Yeah, that was Klein's
Sergeant
grave.
William Klein. Yeah, it says died on injuries received in a crash, 5th of April, 1943. It says rest in peace, buddy, and it's signed the crew. So, and I think this is where he sees the ghost right after, or the rest of the crew right after this.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out real quick.
So now we're in the hospital, and the doctors are asking him a series of questions, and we come to find out, the twist is revealed, that he was supposed to go on a particular mission. Was he sick, or I can't remember. For whatever reason, he didn't go on the particular mission, and all of the guys in his crew died on that mission. Yeah, and I guess it's his conscience has bothered him. Oh, that's right. He saw a headline in the newspaper. It's a newspaper
article.
Yeah, and it sort of triggered that memory that he's been kind of suppressing for most of his life. And, he feels guilty, horrible guilt and responsibility for all of his crew members, dying on that particular mission. And it sort of triggered all of those things and kind of sent him into... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's been 17 years since the crew vanished and the fighter went down. So they just found it 17 years later, and it's made like the front headlines of the newspaper. So it's big news now, and he just couldn't take it. He's had a mental breakdown, if you will.
Right. And then in the final twist of the episode is revealed when the nurse brings Embry's clothing to the doctor, and she puts like his shoes up on a table, and sand falls out of his shoe. And the question you're left with was Embry really there? Did he travel back in time, or was this all just sort of a dream or a psychological nervous breakdown or whatever? So that's pretty cool little twist at the end. So, Jimbo, do you have trivia that you want to knock out?
I do. I think something we need to talk about is just the entire amount and time it took to get the airplane actually there and what all they went through. Mm-hmm. They actually bought it from a military surplus store, which they said they purchased for, I think, $2,500, if I remember correct.
Yep.
They had to disassemble it, then they had to transport it to the desert location, and then they had to reassemble it on site. So just the time and cost and all that going on with that, I think, would be crazy.
And then I think you might have mentioned this earlier. The planes shown flying are U.S. Navy F-9, F-8 Cougar fighter jets flown by the Blue Angels team. And they were built by...
Have you ever seen the Blue Angels?
I have not. I've always thought about or wondered about going to like an air show or whatever, but I've never actually been to one. So I got a couple more trivia facts. A nurse was on hand for this particular episode to care for anyone who might suffer from heat exhaustion while on location. The episode came in at about $14,000 over budget. $5,000 of the overage was because the King 9's location and transportation expenses. Jimbo, you touched on that a little bit. I guess temperatures, back to the nurse, I think the temperatures were reaching well over 100 degrees on shooting location. Captain Embry, played by Robert Cummings, is said to be 41 years old in this episode. Cummings himself was 50 at the time of the episode, so he looks pretty young in this episode. And then, Jimbo, you talked about this earlier on in the episode, about this being Rod Serling's first appearance. Well, technically it was in the last episode of season 1, but this would sort of be more of a standard tradition that Serling would do his narration and he would be on camera for it. Serling was nervous when standing in front of the camera. He was tensing up when filming for when episodes commenced. While he looked tall on the screen, his height was 5'5", and with nothing on camera of specific height to purposely compare him with, much of the television audience was unaware of this fact. I really don't like to do the hosting. This is Rod speaking. He says, I do it by default if I have to, as he explained to one reporter from the United Press in 1963. So apparently Rod was only 5'5", and he really didn't he tensed up and really didn't like doing the on-screen narration, but, he felt like it was something that he was compelled to do. One other thing, for Rod Serling to make a dialogue in the script as true to form and preventing viewers who served in the U.S. military from laughing at what could be obvious mistakes, Serling consulted the DeForest research at Desilu Studios. The verbiage of an American reporting a missing aircraft in the operations room and dialogue from a pilot of a downed aircraft were given careful attention. To do the research cost, it talks about how much, it was like $15 that he paid a consulting firm for Desilu Studios. I guess it might have been like comprised of former Air Force officers or whatever, so that he wanted to dial in the actual dialogue and what that would sound like, so that it wouldn't seem ridiculous to veterans or whatever when they aired the actual episode.
Well, that brings me up to another point. There's several things, if they didn't want to get laughed at, then there's several things that they've obviously didn't pay attention to or say anything. And one of them is, when he's naming the crew, the captain's naming the crew, and their assigned tasks that they do, he doesn't mention a bombardier. It's a vital crew member on the medium bomber. Also, Embry names Connors as the tail gunner, but when he goes around the aircraft, there's no tail gunner position. There's only a plexiglass glass window on the tail. And, also they said that if military personnel were in the desert like this, they wouldn't be wearing black, dark clothing. They would be wearing khaki uniforms for the heat.
Okay.
So I'm kind of wondering, even like the turrets on this gun, or the gun turrets for this plane are different than turrets actually used on these bombers. So, and then also like the tail number painted, they said is for the B-25 on the show is 42-32359, but it should have been written as 232359. So my question is, if they went through the expense of getting a official spokesperson or whatever from Desilu Studios, then some of this stuff that they didn't want to get laughed at as obviously big mishaps as they go.
Yeah. Those are pretty big. So maybe they should have paid more than $15 to get more insight and research. One thing about Bob Cummings, apparently Serling was glowing in his review of his his portrayal here. He says on September 21st, 1960, Serling told Cummings, "Your performance in The King 9 is something quite unique, and I think you'll share my pleasure in it. I think further, we ought to have some kind of social get-together the night of the premiere, September 30th, so I wish to put a little mark on the calendar. CBS publicity had been calling me with trimmered voices telling me of the fantastic cooperation you've been giving them and publicizing the premiere show. For a man of your stature, this goes well above and beyond the call of duty, and it's much, much appreciated. So he really thought highly, I guess, of Bob Cummings, and he thought well of his performance. Just a few. Do you want to jump into a little biopic of Bob Cummings, or do you have other questions or concerns that you want to drop in? He was born June 9th, 1910. He died December 2nd, 1990. His father actually was a physician, Dr. Charles Clarence Cummings, and he was a surgeon. And he was part of the original staff of Johns Hopkins Hospital St. John's Hospital, pardon me, St. John's Hospital in Joplin, Missouri. He graduated from high school in 1928. He actually was with the U.S. Army Air Force as a pilot during World War II, and he was stationed for a while in Oxnard, California. Now, here's an interesting thing as it relates to aeronautics. He actually is the godson of Orville Wright, who was an old family friend who also taught him to fly, and he piloted his own plane for most of his life. Let's see, maybe another highlight here. This is an interesting thing as it pertains to flying and aeronautics. According to an article in Flying Magazine, when the government began licensing flight instructors, he received flight instructor certificate number 1, the first instructor to ever receive a license. So, wow. Pretty interesting stuff. On a lesser thing, he was among the first guests at Disneyland's grand opening in 1955. That's pretty interesting stuff that he, the Orville Wright stuff, and then the fact that he was the first licensed pilot instructor. Thought that was pretty interesting stuff about Mr. Robert Cummings. No relation.
That's really cool, Eric. I was going to say, you lifelong family friends with the Wright family, it sounds like.
Right.
I do have a question for you, Eric.
Sure, go ahead.
Do you have the Rod Serling's comment at the end of the episode?
Oh, yes, I do.
Tie it all together?
Yeah, we should, the outro, if you will. Listen to Rod's words here. He says, "Enigma buried in the sand, a question mark with broken wings that lies in silent grace as a marker in a desert shrine. Odd how the real consorts with the shadows, how the present fuses with the past. How does it happen? The question is on file in the silent desert, and the answer is waiting for us in the Twilight Zone."
Dun, dun, dun.
So, any questions or observations? Anything that you want to... Well, what do you think of the episode, Jimbo? I mean, what's your overall opinion? Likes, dislikes, etc.
Well, I'll tell you this. I think it's the best one of Season 2 so far. But it's also the worst one of Season 2 so far, since it's the only episode we've covered. I am not a fan of this episode. I just don't like it. And it's no fault of Bob Cummings, because he nailed his performance. It's just it's mediocre at best when it comes to the realm of the Twilight Zone, especially with some of the treats that we were given to in Season 1. And if this is something that you were trying to bring back to CBS and you want to capture a new audience, I don't know if I would have started off with this one.
Fair point. I think it's a lesser version of Where Is Everybody? I think Rod maybe tried to remake it, and he was trying to revamp it maybe to make it some of the mistakes maybe that he thought. I don't know. I prefer Where Is Everybody if I had to compare them, but there are many parallels. There's a single guy, guy who's confused. He's trying to figure out what's going on. I just thought the angle of Where Is Everybody with the whole military angle and all that stuff was a much better reveal and twist than this particular episode. I kind of started to besmirch Season 2, kind of talk it down a little bit in front of Art Toast again, and he corrected me.
Oh,
and he put
you in his place.
Yeah, he really got He gave me a little bit of a 1-2 punch and he was like, what are you talking about? Season 2 isn't as good as Season 1. He's like, there's a lot of good episodes, which he was right when I went back and considered him. However, this particular episode is not one of my favorites in Season 2. I'm with you on that.
Did you hear that? Our toast shots were fired, so if you want to respond.
So as an opening episode, yeah, I think they could have done a little bit better, kind of like what you have stated, but I thought it was okay. It was mediocre probably at best. It dragged in spots, and it's really hard to carry when you have a solo actor trying to carry the whole episode, no matter who it is. I don't care who you are. It's very difficult to do, but
definitely agree.
So this one's in the books,
right? But the next episode it jumps way better, better.
Yeah.
So, well, I think that's the episode's coming to a close. Unless you have anything else you would like to add.
No, I think I got to everything that concerns the King 9 Will Not Return. We'll be dropping in. I don't know when we're going to drop our next episode. Our scheduling, we're trying to get our footing with our scheduling, but
right.
Keep posted, and we'll be sure to drop one in here shortly.
Yeah, we'll drop a couple in here in a couple days, I'm sure. So, with that being said, I think this episode's coming to a close, and that's a wrap. And 80s, take it away.
And cut.
Enigma buried in the sand. A question mark with broken wings that lies in silent grace as a marker in a desert shrine. Odd how the real consorts with the shadows, how the present fuses with the past. How does it happen? The question is on file in the silent desert. And the answer's waiting for us in the Twilight Zone.